Imagine taking your generosity to the next level, impacting more lives and leaving a godly legacy for generations to come. Get ideas and strategies to do just that when you listen to these personal stories from high-level kingdom champions. The Kingdom Investor Podcast showcases business leaders who have moved from success to significance, sharing how they use worldly wealth for kingdom impact. Discover how they grew in generosity, impacted more lives, and built godly legacies. You'll find motivation, inspiration, and practical steps to grow as a kingdom investor.
Welcome to the Kingdom Investor Podcast. This is your host, Daniel White, and today we get to interview Tim Metzner. Tim, would you share with our audience where you're coming to us from?
Sure. Happy to be here, Daniel. I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, Tim, would you tell us maybe just a little bit about what you're doing right now and maybe a highlight from this week?
Sure. Yeah. So right now I'm currently one of the co-founders of Coterie Insurance. So that's my full-time day job today. Let's see, a highlight from this week. Man, it's one of, as an entrepreneur, there's so many highs and lows throughout every single week. But I would say a good one this week would actually be coming back on Monday. So I was out last week with the family and just kind of walked into Monday feeling really refreshed after actually taking some downtime and really enjoying the holiday and the holiday weekend. So coming into Monday feeling like I had a lot of energy and ready to go. It's probably one of the highlights so far.
Great. Yeah. So before we get into your story, do you mind praying for our listeners in just this time?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. God, first of all, we just thank you for the opportunity to gather in your name. It is not often that I get to pray to start a podcast. So I thank you for that opportunity just to maybe overtly talk about you and your kingdom. It's a blessing and a cool opportunity for me. Lord, I pray that you would take this conversation down whatever rabbit holes make sense for the audience that's going to hear it, Lord, whether that's one specific person or a group of people. You know better than we do what needs to be said and what folks need to hear. And so we pray that you would just use us to ask the right questions and to think about answers in a way that will be refreshing and will resonate with the folks listening. We ask this all in the powerful and mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. All right, Tim, would you share a little bit about your background and how you got into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, happy to do it. Yeah, it's funny. Like I always talk about it as a seed planted by God. It's the way I describe my journey because at some point, I really think it was early in college. So graduated high school and I got an opportunity to have a full ride scholarship at the University of Cincinnati for academics, which was an awesome opportunity. I'll be honest, I was an 18-year-old kid. I had the chance to go play basketball at some small schools that couldn't offer me money, but said like, hey, you have a spot on the team. But then I got a full ride academic scholarship. And, for me, it was the first person in my family to go to college. And my parents, scraped things together to take care of the kids. So the fact that I could go and have college be taken care of was a harder decision than it should have been, but I made the right choice. Went to the University of Cincinnati for a full ride. And that program was business specific. So I was accepting an opportunity to go study business at the University of Cincinnati as part of this program. It was really built to kind of fight they called it the brain drain in Cincinnati. So we'd have great, smart students who would leave Cincinnati, go to school elsewhere, and then not come back. And we have, amazing corporate citizens in Cincinnati like Procter & Gamble and Kroger and Fifth Third and, a lot of actual Fortune 500s who were like, man, we need to retain the talent. So a lot of folks got together and basically said, let's build this scholarship program that will attract and retain great talent here in Cincinnati to build the future kind of business leaders. So that's the program I got accepted into. One of the things I was attracted to the program was they required co-op, which just meant every other quarter you went to work. So you got a real job. So you'd do like a quarter of class and then you'd go to your co-op, which would typically be at one of these large Fortune 500s or, a pretty large organization, and you do kind of real work. But at some point, as I started interviewing for that, I just had this really strong feeling that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I always say it's a seed planted by God because I couldn't have even told you what entrepreneurship was. I don't think I could have defined it. Like I didn't grow up around it. I didn't know anyone who was. I had this inclination that I wanted to be a business owner or start a business. And so as I started interviewing for my first co-op, I had some great interviews with some large companies. And then I got randomly placed with an entrepreneur. This was a guy who had built and sold a company to eBay already. This was kind of early 2000s, or maybe the year 2000 actually. So this is early .com era. He had built his first company, sold it to eBay, and was working on company number 2 on the side while he was doing his earnout with eBay still. And he just happened to decide, because he was a UC grad, he's like, I'm going to hire a co-op to help, get this thing kind of started as I'm spinning plates over here doing this earnout thing. And so I got placed in an interview with him, and I just fell in love with the idea that I could go work for someone who had built a company and had this very missional vision for what he wanted to do. He wanted to help people achieve goals in their life, and he wanted to build a company around it and use kind of the web and technology to do it. I'm like, man, all of that sounds amazing. I don't know what the heck he's talking about, but I'm going to go learn. So that was I got placed with that. I ranked that as my top choice for where I wanted to go work, and they ranked me as their top choice, and they hired me as a co-op, and ended up spending, most of my school working kind of full time. Even when I was in class, I was still putting in a lot of hours, because it was a startup and it was really exciting, and they gave me a lot of responsibility as a young kid who didn't know what the heck they were doing. It was like, go figure this thing out, go learn this thing, right? And so I just fell in love with that opportunity to have a huge impact with a small team who was kind of running hard after a big vision. That really stuck with me. So that was kind of the early journey. That was my first entrepreneurial endeavor. I wasn't a founder there, but I was, one of the first employees. And after I graduated from University of Cincinnati, I went and worked there full time for, I think, another 5 or 6 years or something like that. It was 10 years all in, and I had been a part of that organization, and they were kind of no longer a startup, had started to figure some things out. We're doing pretty well. And I had met my wife, and I had gotten married, and I had had my first kid. So I kind of found myself at this point where it's I still feel like I'm supposed to be an entrepreneur. And I feel like if I don't make the leap soon, I'm not going to. You kind of get to that point in life where it gets harder, right? You have more responsibility, more pressure. And I started to have that feeling. And so there was a little bit of I call it a nudge maybe that God was giving me. And, it was finally I had this kind of prayer experience. I'll never forget. There's at my church, Crossroads, we go through what's called an all church journey. So it's you go through this immersive experience where there's a weekend service, there's individual work, and then there's a prayer experience, and then there's group work as well. And that prayer experience at the time was you kind of walk down this path and you're carrying a suitcase filled with rocks, and it's kind of symbolizing the weight of the world. And then you kind of sit down and you're just resting in God's presence. And it was the first time I feel like I truly heard from God. It wasn't audible, but it was as clear as I can imagine hearing from God would be. And he was just I need you to go. It's time to take the leap. I'm I've been praying for a year before that. Put me in, coach. I'm ready. Tell me what to do. Where do you want me? Right. And I felt like I was hearing crickets. And finally, what I heard was you just need to go. I need to teach you something about faith by making this true leap of faith moment. And so, yeah, it was that night I went home and told my wife, I think I need to put in my 2 weeks. And she's like, okay, I know this has been on your heart and mind, but I thought we were waiting for the company. You're what company you're going to start? I'm I don't know. But I know I can get some consulting work. I'll find a way to pay the bills while I figure this thing out. But I think it's time. I need to do this. And I'll never forget the conversation with Christy. She was just she was super supportive. She's man, just promise me that if in 6 months you haven't figured something out, you'll go get a big boy job, quote unquote. I remember her saying this specifically, right? And I'm that's totally fair. Yes, you got it. And, I doubt we had things figured out in 6 months, but we never had that conversation again. And she supported me throughout that journey. And I'll tell you, Daniel, it was so clear on the other side of that, making that decision, doors opened. I was getting I wasn't looking for a job. I was getting job offers that I would have never expected to get. It was, it was just kind of I felt God's favor in that time where it felt like a lot of opportunities were opening up that shouldn't have, or I wouldn't have expected to. And so it definitely felt like God was honoring that choice. And that was where I started to have this realization that, and this has happened a couple of times in my life now, I feel like most of us wait for the calling or the call, what's that thing I'm supposed to go do?
Yeah.
And I know for me, my own experience has been I have not heard that. I think calling, I believe, is a 2-step process. You need to first be called away from the thing you're doing today before you can be called to that next thing, for me at least, right? And so
Same.
For me, it's been, again, multiple occasions where until I honor the first step, it's okay, I think it's time to move on and make an actual decision, put a stake in the ground, kind of burn the ships. That's when God starts to show up and is okay, here's some opportunities for you. Which one would you like, Tim? Right. So that's kind of been my journey in a nutshell. Left Smart People, that first company. Yeah, go ahead.
So Tim, what stage of life were you in? How old were you? Did you have kids yet? Like what, can you give a little context for when you made that kind of step out of faith,
Yes,
out of the position without really knowing where God was leading or what the next step was?
Yeah. So I would have been 30, right about 30 years old, and just had my first kid. I think, I don't even think our first kid was one, or it was close to one. Made that decision, stepped out. And then I remember like, it felt like weeks, maybe it was months later, that we found out my wife was pregnant with kid number 2. And like, oh boy, pressure's really on now. So yeah, that like step out of the startup environment, or the company I was in, and like with the purpose of going to start something, not knowing exactly what that thing would be. That was kind of that first leap of faith.
Yeah. So where did that take you then? Can you?
Yeah. Happy to talk more about that. So like I mentioned, plenty of opportunities. I did get some consulting work pretty quickly to kind of pay the bills, which was super helpful and fantastic. And I had started to get like really excited about entrepreneurship in the Cincinnati, Ohio region, and, kind of tech startups specifically. And there just wasn't much activity at the time. So I started kind of stirring the pot and helped like organize some things like Startup Weekend and some meetup events, and like started trying to kind of replicate what I had seen in some other places, which was like community around entrepreneurs. Like it felt like for most of my journey at Spark People, that first company, was like, we were kind of just on an island figuring it out. Like there was no one telling you like how to do this thing. Like I loved my education, but it didn't prepare me to be a tech entrepreneur. Like all the marketing, customer acquisition stuff I was doing was very different than the marketing I was being trained to do at like basically like brand marketing at P&G, right? Like very different experience from what I actually formally was trained in. And so we just kind of figured it out, hired smart people who were self-learners, and, we kind of just figured stuff out. But, I had visited some other ecosystems, cities where like I saw the bubblings of like startup communities. I'm like, oh, this could be powerful. Like I want to see this happen in Cincinnati. And it turns out there's a couple other people who had already done some stuff here locally. So I started hooking up with them and just kind of tagging along, and started adding on trying to build momentum around startups in the community. So I think a lot of that pre-work was what made it a lot easier for me to find some consulting work, and then ultimately meet who would become my co-founder at Differential, which was the company I would end up starting next. And, really it was, again, I would call it God's favor. It was just lots of opportunity. Like felt like I could have gone a couple different directions. And then it was just like over beers with this one guy who we realized like we had the same vision for the someday company we wanted to start. And we just kind of were like, why not try it now? Like, I know we have no business doing this thing, but we had this vision for like a startup studio or venture studio where like we want to serially launch companies with this kind of SWAT team of folks who've got some experience around startups and building technology companies. Like, let's partner with entrepreneurs who have ideas and like help them bring those to life, and kind of act like co-founders, come alongside them, and also build some of our own stuff. So that was kind of our vision and for Differential, and that's what we did. So we kind of initially scrapped together. Like we basically just, Rye Walker's my co-founder there, and he was doing the same thing I was, which was like he had quit his job and he had some consulting work that he was doing to kind of keep the lights on. And we just started throwing all of our money in the pot and saying like, what does it take to pay for your bills? What's it take to pay for your bills? Like, let's just take care of our families and then put everything else into, building this company. Like, let's try and bring some more people along and do some, build some stuff. So that led to some cool opportunities. And, ultimately we were able to raise some capital to help us kind of pour fuel on the fire. But we really got to do this kind of magic thing we wanted to do, which was like, we got to build some of our own stuff. We got to partner with entrepreneurs who had ideas, but didn't know how to bring their idea to life. Usually it was like, I'm a domain expert and I have this idea for a software, but I don't know how to build a software company. We're like, great, we will come alongside you and we'll act like your co-founders. Yeah. And then we did some services, right? So we would help build technology and websites and MVPs for entrepreneurs. And man, we just had a blast. We like, it felt like we were moving a million miles a minute. We had so many plates we were spinning. It was really amazing. We ended up having a couple ideas that turned out to be pretty interesting. And one of those eventually, Rye, my co-founder, would spin out of Differential and go run as CEO for a while. It's called Astronomer. And they not too long ago raised money at about $1 billion valuation. So they're one of those kind of unicorn software tech startups up and to the right that most of our ideas did not turn into that way, but we had a couple nuggets that did. And so we kind of validated the model, and really at Differential started really leaning into like the profitable business we had that we were ignoring was like really services. Like a lot of people saying, love what you're doing. Like come help us build, right? And these would be larger companies who'd say, come alongside us and help us build more like a startup. Help us think through this kind of more innovative way to build software and technology. And so helped spend a couple of years helping to scale that service business and build like a really nice culture and team and environment where we could do amazing work using technology, but in less of the kind of startup grind type state that we were kind of surrounded by initially. So that was Differential. The quick aside, I know you've had Luke Dooley on as a guest. So a quick aside, not long after I started Differential, which by the way, we started Differential out of my church atrium. So at some point when I left my job, I realized like, I don't know where I'm going to work from. And I remember thinking like, oh, Crossroads has free coffee and free Wi-Fi and their atrium's open from like 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. I'm like, those are all the things I need to build a tech company. Like, I'm just going to start showing up there. And so that's what we did. Like, we literally started Differential out of my church. And it turned out a couple other people were kind of doing something similar. And that led to a really interesting like conversation and a breakfast with the senior pastor there, Brian Tome, who was just like, his quote was something along the lines of like, I'm used to seeing like homeless people hang out in our lobby and like chug our coffee and creamer and, it's fine, but I'm not used to seeing entrepreneurs hanging out. Like, what are you guys doing here? Tell me about your story. And like, that was when we had this sort of aha moment that there was something interesting about the combination of a faith walk and an entrepreneurial walk, and actually combining the two with a conversation I'd never even really thought of, even though I had, even though God told me to go leave my job and start this thing, it just hadn't really occurred to me how much overlap there is in an individual's faith journey and in their kind of journey of being an entrepreneur. And so that breakfast led to what would become Ocean Programs, the nonprofit that Luke now runs today, and all the amazing programming we're doing around kind of faith and entrepreneurship work. But that was kind of a cool accidental, like didn't mean to start a nonprofit, but God was kind of speaking to my heart and connecting me with other people at the same time I was starting my for-profit business. It's like, hey, let's do this in a different way. Let's kind of run counter to the common narrative of like, life, friends, family, all that, be damned, to go all in for 10 years and make a ton of money and you can do it whatever you want. I'm like, yeah, but most of the people I've seen do that end up like divorced with kids who hate them and they're lost at the other end of that. Like that doesn't sound like success. So that was kind of the thread we pulled on with starting Ocean.
Gotcha. Yeah. Would you be able to maybe like visually walk us through what Differential and Oceans, I guess they are similar in a sense, right?
Kind of, yeah. So there definitely are some similarities. With Ocean specifically, we've got a number of programs, some specifically geared towards like the tech entrepreneur who is going to raise capital and kind of that fast growth tech company. So we've got an accelerator program. So the accelerator program basically takes 10 companies a year through a 6 to 8 week journey. So it's very specific. Like you're going to be trained as an entrepreneur and you're going to be trained as an individual to build into your faith and build community, and also the basics and building blocks of like, how do you prepare yourself to build a tech company that's going to require venture capital and kind of get to that next level. Yeah. So we do, as part of that program, those companies get an investment. So we invest in those companies. They get training, they get mentorship and community. And then ultimately, they kind of leave and go off and go run their businesses. And after that kind of 8 to 10 week journey, they're kind of off and running. So that's kind of the accelerator model. And, they're obviously in our network forever and we'll help them as much as we can. But at Differential, we were actually in the business of building businesses. So we were literally acting as co-founders, building the ideas either internally or with entrepreneurs that came in from the outside, but we're hand in hand actually writing code for them, like building their go-to-market strategy, like raising funding. Like we were the entrepreneurs and also kind of the investors with our time instead of writing checks. Okay, so that's kind of the difference. And then Ocean now has gone on to do a lot of other things, but actually the biggest part of the business today, the nonprofit, is serving non-tech entrepreneurs or kind of Main Street entrepreneurs. So whether it's I'm trying to start an accounting firm or a services firm or a coffee shop or whatever it might be, we're coming alongside them. And usually it's like, I'm really good at a thing. How do I turn that thing into a business? Right. Yeah. So we help train them in the building blocks of building a profitable kind of, Main Street business. Again, coinciding that with a journey for how do I build into you as the entrepreneur so that, you can withstand the challenges, the turbulation, the trials that you're going to go through. And so that the other end of that, whether you're successful or you fail, like if you fail, you don't sort of lose your identity and your hope in life and in Christ. Like you can kind of weather the storm. But if you're successful, like this is the thing a lot of people don't talk about, like we want you to be a great steward of that success, right? Like we want you to turn into a kingdom builder, right? Who is building into teams and communities and giving back and doing really good things with on the other end of that success. Right. So that's kind of the difference there and what Ocean's focused on. Yeah, like I said, Differential was doing a little more of the company building itself versus just let's guide you on a journey and mentor you.
So we kind of covered like high level, but do you have maybe like a personal story to kind of bring it down to earth to really see from the inside?
Through which lens? Through
just maybe
as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, as an entrepreneur.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll maybe quickly bring up to speed on what I'm doing now. So, 6, 7, 8 years into Differential, I felt that call again to step away. And it was very similar. It was kind of like God was nudging me again, saying like, love what you've done at Differential. The company's great. The culture's great. It's profitable. It's growing, but I want you to take a bigger swing. Like I have something else for you. And I was just like, oh, like that feels scary and not so great. And, finally paying myself a normal salary and, things were a little less chaotic and feeling a little more stable and felt that call again. And that led me to eventually winding myself out of day-to-day Differential and starting Coterie Insurance, which is a insurance startup focused on small business insurance. So we're literally building an insurance company, which is every bit as hard as it sounds. But that's where God called me, right? So I'll bring up to speed there just to say like, that journey now, we're 4 years into that journey. We raised a bunch of capital and we've had really great success. But the first year and a half of that thing were an absolute grind, like just trying to figure out how to build an insurance company and a technology company all at the same time. Because that's kind of what we're doing different is we're trying to use we're building an insurance company as if, you were to start one today and leverage all the modern data and technology infrastructure that's available. Like that's what we're doing, right? So there's a whole lot to building both insurance and technology and bringing those two together at the same time. And to do that, like it also requires really great expertise and talent. And it's really hard to do that without money. And so like, unlike just a pure technology company, like if you're scrappy, you know what you're doing, like, and you have a good network, you can get pretty far without raising a ton of money. Like you can build your product, get to market, prove that you've got something there. Not as true on the insurance side. Like we had to hire great insurance experts, to get to market. And you can't attract someone away from a legacy insurance company to go start a startup very easily. Like it requires quite a bit of effort and frankly, some capital. And so, we had to raise money early on and before we were ever in market, right? We had to convince investors like we've got this big idea, but it's going to require, some capital ahead of really having anything to show you other than a plan and a vision and some previous experience. And, that led us, we were able to do that successfully. We built a team, got to the point though where, we were running out of money again and we still weren't really in market. We were close with some stuff, but we got to that point where it was literally like $100 and something in the bank, a payroll coming up. We had been pitching, it had to be close to 100 investors. We pitched, almost all no's. And my wife and I ended up like investing our own money in the business to help us make timelines line up so that we can make a payroll and keep going. And then, God provided an investor. But that one term sheet after pitching 100 people ended up being the exact right one at the exact right time. We closed the round before we ran out of money. And 2 weeks later, COVID shut down the world. So it was like one of those just truly like God teed it up. And like what I would say is that sounds really stressful and tumultuous. And it was. But there's this level of peace that like my faith journey had just prepared me for. It was like, however this thing turns out, like I believe I was called to this thing. I know God's building me through this. Like I felt it right through that tension, that hardship, the struggle. Like I know I'm being built through this. And so like, I'm going to work my butt off to make this thing work and do everything I can, control whatever I can to get that investor to get us to the next level. But it's not up to me. Like it's not going to be in my control. I know that, right? Like there's a tattoo on my arm that reminds me of that daily. It just says, not in my power, not to my glory. Like it's not about me. It's not because of me. And so like, if I truly believe that, yes, I'm going to be stressed out at times and it's going to be hard, but like there's a level of peace that comes from, my kind of walk with Jesus that just wouldn't be there had I not gone through that journey. And so that's the why behind Ocean, is like that level of kind of spiritual and community preparation, right? Like I'm not doing that on my own. Like I'm doing founder therapy with other believers who are founders as well and who've been there and can counsel me through it and like keep me humble in the highs and keep me from cracking in the lows, right? Like I have the repetition and the community around me to survive through those storms. And there's been, I could probably spout off a lot of other examples throughout, any one of the journeys I've been on, including the nonprofit of, that just the stress and challenge that comes through the entrepreneurial journey, that if you wear it on your sleeve or like your identity becomes too tied to the success of this thing, like that's where the stress and pressure really ramps up, right? Like you believe that your success or failure is tied to the success and failure of this business. Like, of course that's going to be stressful, right? Like you believe you're going to be a total loser and failure if this thing doesn't work out. And like, that's just not true, but it's a lie we tell ourselves as entrepreneurs all the time.
Right. Yeah. So before we got on, we talked a little bit about culture building and how impactful entrepreneurs can be in the world and really even changing the world. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, I love this topic. It's, I think like most people, when I first started thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, like it was very much that like, belief that entrepreneurs can change the world. Like you can solve big problems. You can literally, make the world a better place through entrepreneurship. And I still believe that, right? I think that's absolutely true. And that should be a motivator for entrepreneurs. And I hope we're doing that at Coterie. And I know I've seen us do that, throughout the years at Differential and at Ocean. So I don't want to downplay the change the world through your business, because you can solve some amazing problems through entrepreneurship. But I had this realization at some point in the middle of the Differential journey where we had probably 25 or 30 employees around the table. And most of those were software engineers. And most of those have been with us for 5 years plus. And we don't pay Google salaries there. Like we're not able to. We're a service company basically, right? So we pay pretty good salaries, competitive salaries, but I know those folks are getting offers for, higher paying jobs very regularly. That's not why they're staying at Differential. And I started to like lean into that more. And when we started Differential, I remember Ryan and I had the conversation of like, let's build the last company we would ever want to work for. I don't know whether or not that will be true, but let's build the kind of company that you would want to work for the rest of your career, rest of your life. Like let's make that be our goal. And so we did a lot of stuff I use the term overinvest in culture. Like we overinvested in culture, like spent money on stuff that didn't make sense for the stage we were at. And so at some point though, you don't think about, I didn't necessarily connect that to retention, employee retention. I just connected to like, I'm going to build a great place to work. And of course, I hope people stick around. But fast forward, I'm thinking about like, how are we retaining these engineers? You go talk to them. They're like, I feel cared for. Like, I feel like I'm heard. I have a voice. Like, you don't grind me to death. Like, I work hard, but I get to go have hobbies. And like, I started playing in a band again. I haven't played in a band in forever. I travel like quite a bit, and I would not be able to travel if I didn't have this flexibility and freedom. And so you just start to realize like, man, the impact that we can have through the lives of our employees might significantly, maybe even outpace the impact that the business has. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it just became this aha moment of like, man, see, if you help people come alive in their work, they come alive in their lives. They become better spouses, parents, volunteers, community members. Like they pick up hobbies. They're just more joyful human beings, and therefore like have a chance to have even more impact on the people around them. And so it's like, man, we spend most of our waking hours at work, like more, you think about the impact of a church, and, I love our church, but like they get me for an hour a week on Sundays, or, hour and 15 minutes, and, maybe some between time through my own study and whatever. But like, I get my employees for 40 plus hours a week, and not that I'm preaching the gospel to them day to day, but I have the chance to influence and impact people significantly more than just about anyone else does if I treat them well. And so I just started having this like realization of like, man, I think God called me to take a bigger swing because he wanted me to influence more people. Like it was more about create a place where you can, attract and retain and care for more of my people as employees of Coterie. And so that became a big focus of mine is like, if you build, and it's not that hard, it's sad that people get blown away when you care about them. Like when you tell them like, go take time off and spend it with your sick mom. Like, why would that even be like, why would you hesitate even to bring that up? Like, it's mind blowing the little things that blow people away when you, like, if you dig into it, all you're doing is like treating them as a human being and showing that you care about them.
Yeah. I think that's really, and I think the same goes for like when they turn around then and care for clients and for customers. It's just a whole nother level.
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen it like folks they kind of bring it like, because when they feel empowered and they feel listened to and cared for, like that shouldn't be the reason you build into your people and you have a great culture. But I can promise you they're more productive. They are more loyal. They want to come to work. Like there's a different level of energy and impact that they have on their work and their coworkers that they wouldn't have otherwise. And so I do believe it's a bit of a secret weapon, like, treating people well. It's the right thing to do. It turns out it's also a good thing for business.
Yeah. So a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs and business owners. So what would you say to them about maybe some keys that you have learned to being successful as an entrepreneur and going through some of those highs and lows and challenges? And, do you have any maybe words of wisdom?
Ramp up your prayer game. I tell people all the time, like, if you want a strong prayer game, go start a company. Because like you will be in so many of those situations that are outside of your control. And I don't think it's often in life where we realize that. Like you're like, man, like there's little I can do to control this situation. In the entrepreneurial journey, though, it's fairly frequent where you're just like, again, I'm going to work as hard as I can and do what I can to control this thing. But I don't know whether I'm going to have the right investor meeting and whether that investor is my pitch is going to resonate with them today or not. Right. Like it's just, I can't really control that. I can only control my own actions. But what I can do is, walk into every meeting and pray to God that this is the one, right? I can literally say a prayer before I step into that meeting, that pitch, that next, sales pitch, like whatever it is, like whether you're trying to recruit, to raise money, to land a new client, whatever that next big thing is, you should work hard for it, but bring God into it. Like, why wouldn't you? Why would you just leave him in the morning and walk into your day without him or leave him at church on Sunday? So I really think a lot of it's like, just be really bold in your prayer and what you want and what you need to come true for the next level. Like one of my co-founders and I still today at Coterie, every week we have this discipline of, we have a prayer list, and it starts with, and the first thing is just gratitude. Like, what are we thankful for this week? Like, what happened since we last talked about this that we know isn't about us, or like it's a blessing from God. So here's a list of things we're thankful for. And the next list is like, here's what we need help with. And like, this is an every week discipline where we practice gratitude and we, praise God for what he's doing in our business, and we ask for specific things. And we're not an overtly Christian company. We don't, pray before our meetings and talk about it with our team. But I can promise you it has led to conversations with folks who have come to me and asked me, and it leads to some really cool stuff. Whether or not you're overt about your faith, like it's pretty obvious to people. So yeah, so pray is kind of the first one. Surround yourself with amazing people. Like not enough people have, I call it founder therapy, but they don't have that group of entrepreneurs that are spending time with. Like I've been doing this almost throughout my whole entrepreneurial career of having a weekly cadence of a small group with other entrepreneurs where we're doing life together. We're talking about the trials, the tribulations, the problems, the stressors. We're celebrating successes. We're, the highs and the lows, like week in and week out, we're either on Zoom or around a table, kind of processing that stuff real time. And my spouse is amazing and she's so supportive, but she's not an entrepreneur. Like there's just, it's a different conversation I can have with almost anyone else with that group of folks who've been there. They're in the trenches now, or they've been in the trenches. And so having that group, like I've solved many problems through that group where it's just conversation that like, hey, have you thought about this? Or, a different angle or lens or viewpoint, or even just like that therapy session of like, God's got this, man. Like, I know it feels stressful. I know you're overwhelmed right now, but like, let's pray about it and let's release it. Right. And so having that level of just freedom to process on a weekly basis has been incredibly powerful for me throughout my journey. And I always say, like, everyone says it sounds cliche, but like your job as an entrepreneur is to hire great people. That's it. Like I am not very good at most of what I do. I figure it out until I can hire someone better. Like, I've gotten to wear a lot of different hats, so I can cover a lot of ground if I need to, but it doesn't mean I'm any good at any of it. I can keep plates spinning, but I need to find someone who's an expert at that task as quickly as possible, and then give them the opportunity to go crush it and, run hard in their lane. And so I think it requires an incredible level of humility to do that well, to admit that there are people better than you. And admitting it is one thing, and actually giving them the freedom and flexibility to go do the thing without you interjecting is another thing. And it's hard, but I've seen so much success through just hiring and empowering well. Those two things are just massively important. And, early on, I know it's really hard to do that because you got to get to a certain level before you can even hire well. But some of that is a leap of faith too, where like occasionally you got to be like, I really believe we need to get to the next level, and to get there, we need this person. We're going to trust that we bring them on and we'll figure this thing out. So that even requires a leap of faith at times, is hiring well.
So Tim, do you mind sharing a failure that you've learned a lot from?
Yeah. The question is just
the bigger the better. Yes.
Yeah. It's like, which one? Let's see. A failure I've learned a lot from. So a couple jump to mind immediately. One is at Differential fairly early on. So we had raised a first round of capital, and that was going pretty well. We'd kind of, I won't say proven the model, but we had enough momentum and energy to, we thought, raise a good bit more capital. Say, like, hey, let's put our foot on the pedal here, pour some gas on the fire. Let's go a little bit faster. So we went out to raise a couple $1 million. And at the time, we were in Cincinnati, Ohio. There weren't many investors in the area. So we're pitching all over the place, and mostly got no's. And most of the no's were because we were in Cincinnati, Ohio. Like, was this just not where you build a tech company? Like, if you want to move to the Bay Area, you want to move to New York City, or even to Chicago, or like all these places where you could build a tech company, like, yeah, then we'll consider investing in you. So it was just a whole lot of no's. We finally found one though, a VC who was like, okay, what you're doing is interesting enough that, I'd be willing to take a flyer on this, but I need you to, basically I'm going to write half of the round. I'm going to be half of your investment. I need you to go get the rest of it. And if you get that first $1 million, I'm going to match your second $1 million, and we're going to go do this thing. And, we were able to do that. Like we, had been pitching a lot of angel investors as well, and got to a point where we had enough kind of rounded up, and it was literally like time to go close and like bring this thing to life. And two of my angel investors were going to write like more than like 2/3 of that other $1 million were going to come from two individuals. And they got cold feet last minute and like literally called me out of nowhere. It was like, we're not going to participate in this round. And it just like overnight, the whole thing crumbled. Then the whole round fell apart. We had some other investors who were still willing to write some checks, but it ended up being, what was it, like $500,000 total maybe instead of $2 million. So I was green enough. We made the mistake. Like we started acting as if money was in the bank, and it wasn't, because we had verbal commits. Like this was a done deal. It was just get it papered, get signatures, and we're off and running. But it fell apart. And, so like a couple big things I learned there. Like the first was like, you hear it again, it's cliche, but like until it's in the bank, like it's not yours. Like don't start spending, don't make those big changes. Like don't distract the team from that. Like stay focused on whatever you need to do to keep the lights on right now, and assume it's going to fall apart, and know what you're going to do if it does. Fortunately, we were able to scramble and kind of figure it out, but it was a true scramble. It was like an oh crap moment of, I don't know how I'm going to even be able to pay salaries and keep these people around, and how, like, we had to do some really creative stuff with our cap table and splitting out the company. And like, it was chaos. And by the grace of God, we figured it out. And, all the things we were trying to bet on ended up successful. But, there were probably 6 bets we didn't get to make because we never raised the rest of that money. And we had even, recruited some people in to join us who were going to help us get to that next level that we now had to pay and honor. And, so that was a crazy moment. I think another big thing though, out of that was, as upset as I was able to maintain my composure, and I never burned a bridge, even with those, those couple investors who changed everything overnight. Like they ended up investing in some other companies I was a part of and some other things I was doing. So I maintained relationships, and those folks have been actually really supportive in various different ventures I've been a part of. So even though they got cold feet on that, in hindsight, like one of the big learnings was like, they weren't tech investors, but they're like private equity investors who were interested in this kind of tech startup stuff. Right. So it's not crazy that they would get cold feet around something they don't really understand. Like it was new to them, but like through a couple of years of getting to know them, like and walking out and showing them progress and like staying in touch, like they ended up being fairly active angel investors in tech companies as well. So that turned out to be a good thing. But, everything in me wanted to put up a middle finger and say, hey, go pound sand. I'm out of here. I don't want anything to do with you. But it would have ended up being a harmful thing for me as well, right? Like just harboring bitterness and it's not good for any of us. So that was a really just chaotic, tumultuous time. I wish I had handled things differently. I wish I had been a little more careful about, really like should have had a lot more capital committed, like round up way more than you need. If you need 2 million, go get 2.5. And, by the time you close, like maybe you'll have the 2. But you don't, those are things like you're not really thinking about. You just feel like we've got yeses. Yes means yes, right? Like that's a check in the bank. Like, well, not in the venture world, it doesn't always mean that. And, people have reserved the right until they sign to change their minds. So yeah, that was a crazy hard journey. Another one I'll share, maybe that's fairly top line, was at Coterie earlier this year in the summer. We had to go through layoff. For the first time in my career, I had to actually lay people off, about 20% of our staff. And, I've told you the story. I told you, Daniel, it was like building companies and teams and cultures and people was like a big part of my heart. And I think it's what I was called to do. So with that being said, to have to turn around and lay off a good chunk of those people you've worked so hard to build into and build a great culture around, it was one of the most brutal experiences of my life to be a part of that. And I don't think there's any right way to lay people off. Like you can't get that right. I think either ways you can get it wrong. I think you can do it worse. But, I think a number of the things we learned through that journey was like, number one, like we scaled too quickly, and it's easy to beat yourself up and say that. And it's true. Like, and it's objectively, we can look at it and go like, yeah, we hired too fast. But at the time, the narrative from investors was, we love what you're doing. Go as fast as you can. We're going to raise another round that's even bigger next year. Right. And not just from our investors. I mean, from the world, the kind of the venture world around us, you look at valuations and checks people were writing. We're like, the model is pretty clear here. Like, we're going to raise our Series A now. We're going to raise a bigger B. We're going to raise a C. And like, we can do that all within a couple of years of each other. So let's be really aggressive in this thing. And, then like a number of events happen, right? A war, economy that starts tanking, like all these things that are, again, outside of your control. But they affect you. Absolutely. Right. Like once the stock market starts crashing, like guess who gets spooked? Investors who have a bunch of money in the stock market. And they're like, yeah, maybe we should slow down on this venture stuff and stop writing checks, or like really be discerning about what companies we're writing checks into. And so it's like, it's really crazy how quickly the narrative went from grow, focus on top line to focus on profitability, like almost overnight. It's like, the companies that are profitable or have a path to it are going to be the ones that survive and advance. It makes sense, right? Everyone should want to build that. It was in our roadmap too, but it was like 2 years down the road. We're going to bring that up to now. It's like, now that's the primary focus, is what's our path to profitability and extending our runway so we can survive and advance if this world doesn't turn back to what it was before. So, that's a really hard lesson to learn, and to have to lay people off. And, one of the things, as hard as it was, we had investors who had survived the .com crash and 2008, and they had been operators. And so their lessons learned were like, act before everyone else is acting. Like, I know you're not seeing a ton of layoff headlines yet. Like, you will probably. And the longer you wait, the worse it is for your company and the less likely you are to survive. So act fast and cut deep was their advice. And what they meant by that was like, if you act fast, your team will have a much easier job getting hired now. Like, they won't have a problem going and finding new jobs, and you'll be able to take care of them with severance packages and give them time and space. And cut deep, what they were saying is like, don't have to do this again. Like, you can't fully control it, but like, don't go halfway and then realize in a couple months it wasn't deep enough and you have to go through another round of layoffs, because it can be really hard to recover from a couple rounds of that, from a culture and just trust and team building standpoint, right? So rip the Band-Aid off, do it fast, and try and go, make sure you're doing it deep enough so that you won't have to do it again. So super painful lessons, terrible time where I was like, just really bummed out, but I felt good that we were able to take care of people. We even paid some of our recruiters to stick around longer and help without placement. And all of us kind of acted like, helped a lot of folks find jobs, which was really good. But it ended up being the right thing for the business. And Fast forward, we're now in a spot where we have been able to raise additional capital, even when no one else is, because the fundamentals of our business look a lot better than they did 6 months ago. And we have that story and that narrative and the path to profitability where, we're now just a better business than we were then for a number of reasons. But a lot of it was just we had to control our burn. We were spending too much money too quickly. And again, in a frothy capital market, that works. But that's not where we're at today. So you have to think about, those things that are outside of your control and how you would act, if the world changes overnight. So yeah, painful stuff. And I think in the aftermath of that, what I'm still wrestling with today, Daniel, is our culture's changed. It's probably forever changed, right? There was a spot we were at Coterie before where it was just everyone would have said 10 out of 10, or almost everyone would have said, this is the best place I've ever worked. Love my job, love this environment. And we've struggled since then. We've had attrition, some people who voluntarily leave and, have lost some trust and some belief and, maybe start to question, was some of that stuff fake that you talked about and all the culture stuff? Because then you let people go man, I get it. That's a fair question. You should ask that. And, we have to restore trust and make sure people know that none of that was BS. It was genuine, but we had to make tough decisions as a business that unfortunately meant letting people go. So we've spent a lot of time and energy and kind of rebuilding trust and trying to think about how do we make sure Coterie becomes that great place or really is. And honestly, a lot of it just becomes a narrative folks are telling themselves, this isn't a great place to work anymore. It's kind of doom and fear. And some of it's because of our layoff. A lot of it though is you look outside and you're wow, Twitter's doing this, Google's doing this, Facebook's doing everything. Intel now, I just saw this morning, Intel's about to lay off a ton of people. It's it's happening everywhere. And so you start to get in this cycle of doom and fear. And then everyone starts questioning again, well, is Coterie going to have to do this again? I can't promise you we're not. I'll never say that because I don't know what the future looks like, but we're not planning on it. We feel like we did our work early on and put ourselves in a good spot, but it's one thing to say and it's another thing to help people really believe that. So that's been hard to recover from, honestly.
Yeah. So before we jump into the mentor minute, I want to end on a high note. I know we talked about some of the failures, but also I want to talk about a little bit about your vision for Coterie and where you're going and really maybe a little bit more optimistic about the future.
Thank you. Would much prefer to end there. Yeah. So that's the cool thing, right? Like I said, we have a better business than we had a year ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago, because of some of the hard work we've done to really focus on building for a profitable organization. But what that doesn't take away from is our long-term vision. We believe we can build the next great commercial insurance company. And this is a couple $100 billion industry, just in the US alone, 50 of that's in small commercial, which is what we're focused on today. Our vision, Daniel, is we're building the playbook for how we do insurance differently than the rest of the world. And we're starting with small commercial, but there's a massive commercial insurance industry outside of where we're at today. So we want to start with being kind of that one-stop shop for small commercial. And it's really cool. One of the reasons I got super excited about this industry is, number one, it's a social good. If you're an entrepreneur and your building burns down and you don't have insurance, you don't get to come back. That's it. It's game over for a small business owner. Over half of small business owners don't have insurance. We're making it really easy for them to get insurance and, at an affordable, accurate price. We're charging the right price for the insurance you need today is our goal. And we want to make it a 2-minute process for you. So you don't have to think about it. Get it done, get it over with, and have that security in case of catastrophe, right? So we feel great about helping small business owners who are really the backbone of America and trying to get more of them insured so that they're covered in case of catastrophe. So that's kind of step one is we think we can make a huge dent in the small commercial industry, which, $50 billion industry, no one company owns more than 6 or 7% of the market right now. That's the crazy opportunity that I saw. I was man, for an industry that large to not have a couple really dominant players, that means I don't have to disrupt the Hartford for us to have a great business. We can take some points, start to build market share and no one even cares or knows we exist. And that's kind of a beautiful thing, right? So that's the massive opportunity we see is how do we build the best small business solution out there for business owners and for our partners who sell it, right? So we don't sell direct to small business. We work through agents and brokers and through partners like QuickBooks and other platforms that want to make insurance a part of what they do. And for that agent and broker, they make almost nothing on that small business insurance policy. So we're okay, great. We understand that. why don't it should take you no time then. So we're going to make that couple day process a couple minutes for you so you can write small business insurance. You can care about it and you want to help entrepreneurs in your community, but we're actually going to allow you to make money on it because it's not going to take you any time to actually get it done. So that's our kind of near-term vision is like, let's build the best small commercial insurance, company out there, and then repeat the playbook we're building in small commercial in other areas of commercial insurance over the years. So that's kind of the long-term vision of what we're trying to do.
Well, that's neat, Tim. Thank you so much for sharing that and really enjoyed having you on. We want to jump into the Mentor Minute. First question is, who is the most influential person that you know and how have they impacted you?
Most influential person that I know, it's my wife for sure. Like, I don't think spouses, whether it's a husband or a wife of entrepreneurs, get enough credit. Like, I seriously would not. I have 4 young kids, like 10 and under, and I love being a dad. And I love coaching and doing being really involved in my kids' lives. There's no chance I could do that if Christy didn't team me up to do all that. Like, she does so much to support my entrepreneurial life and my home and family life. Like, that if I didn't have that constant support and know that like things are taken care of and that I can still be really involved because she makes it super easy for me to be really involved, I would be going crazy or, who knows, maybe divorced or with kids who didn't like me. Like, it would just be, it would be a much worse scenario than it is today. But like, I have that constant support and like she, I talked about it with my small group, but it starts with her where it's like, she keeps me humble when things are going well and like reminds me of like, it's not about me and it doesn't matter. Like, my kids don't give a shit that I raised capital like that. They don't care. They want you to spend time with them. That's it, right? Like, go do that. And so she's amazing at that. And also like, when I'm going through some of those, like the layoffs around, like she felt my pain. She prayed with me. She saw me, dealing with a really hard time. And she felt that and she didn't dismiss it. Like, she sat with me in it and, walked with me through it and, prayed through it with me. And so, yeah, like Christy's just been such a great part of my life. The other thing she does is like, she forces me to have a social life outside of work. Like, she organizes get-togethers with friends and makes sure we do date nights. And like, she keeps on top of a lot of that stuff that I value, but I don't do a good job of left to my own devices.
That's good. And then what book or podcast would you highly recommend?
For entrepreneurs specifically? Let's see. There's so many amazing ones. I think probably one of my favorites has been Following Anything Reid Hoffman puts out. So he wrote a book a long time ago around employee culture, and that has influenced a lot of what I've done at Differential and then at Coterie. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on the name of that book, but so he's a founder of LinkedIn and he has a podcast called Masters of Scale as well. So if you're a venture-backed founder who is trying to scale a business over time, like I've learned so many lessons from reading his books and listening to his podcast. So Reid's like just a wealth of knowledge, and his thoughts on, like I said, culture and employee-employer relationship influence a lot of how I think about leading people well in the businesses I've been a part of.
All right. And then final question is, what is the greatest lesson in leadership that you've learned?
The job of a leader is to serve, not to direct. Like, again, it's a cliche, but servant leadership I found to be the most powerful form of leadership. And that means teeing people up to do their best work and getting out of their way, not directing. Like, a lot of people think leadership or managing, they think they're the same thing, first of all. And they think managing is leadership, and managing is not leadership. Sometimes you do have to manage. Sometimes they do have to direct. But I wish more leaders saw it as an opportunity to lift people up to do their best work. And that's really what a leader needs to do well.
All right, Tim, is there anything that we can be praying for you or do to help you accomplish your vision?
Yeah, if you're a small business owner, you need insurance, Coterie Insurance is here for you. So check us out, talk to your agent or broker about it, or go to coterieinsurance.com just to learn more. Yeah, always welcome prayers for the business, for the team, for the culture, and that all of that I can be successful at without, sacrificing on the home front as well. So always striving to be a better husband and father as well. So prayers for leading well at home and at work would be appreciated.
All right. Well, let's pray right now.
Thank you.
God, I thank you and praise you for Tim and the work that he's doing with entrepreneurs and businesses and serving through insurance. God, I pray that you just continue to bless him and guide him, help him to invest in your kingdom well, and that he and his family would be a light and be able to encourage and lift people up. God, I thank you for this time and all that we've learned. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on. And thank you guys for listening to the show. And we'll catch you next time for another episode of The Kingdom Investor.